going to give the floor to do the amendment of judgment in the context of Hajj Menasik. The first lecturer is called Fatih Cinar. He's from Korkut University, Faculty of Theology. The floor is yours, Dr. Cinar. He is going to be connected to us through Zoom. At the outset, I would like to thank Mr. Moderator, Mr. Chairperson, and the distinguished participants. I would like to greet you all. As you mentioned, the title of my paper is The Amendment of Judgment in the Context of Hajj Menasik, in the Hajj Ibadah. There are two dimensions that I focus my attention on in my paper. The first one is the amendment of judgment, and in order to understand this, we would like to first of all understand what is the judgment of what is the amendment of judgment and what we mean in saying this. Then I'm going to talk to you about our methodology. I'm going to talk to you about what kind of amendments can take place in the judgment of Hajj. This is the first slide, which is about the amendment of judgment. Actually, it is a hüküm to be converted into another hükm, or a hüküm to be replacing another hükm. But actually this definition is not a common one adopted by all the fiqh scholars, because the existing hukm can be put into practice in a different manner, or it can be amended, or it can be put into practice using different means. So this is also the amendment of the judgment as well. So with the definition, actually what is referred is made more clear. Fatwa or judgment can be amended in literature. They are used in the place of one another. In the works which are produced in Turkish or Arabic language, we have studied them, and we have seen that amendment of the judgment or amendment of fatwa are two concepts which are used in the place of one another. There are some thoughts or some methodologies which may either narrow down the framework or enlarge it. Those who narrow down the framework, they are actually objecting to the absolute ijtihad activities, because they think that the old fatwa can meet the today's needs and today's conditions as well. But those who are enlarging the framework say that when a judgment is amended, all the hukm is also amended. And Tufi is such a scholar, although what he says is controversial, or what he means to say is controversial. Tufi in this respect is enlarging the framework very broadly, and he is one of the scholars which are providing us with such an enlarged framework and perspective. Of course, the amendment has been a reality since the inception of the Risalet era. In addition, we don't see any verse in the Quran which recommends us amending the judgment, but according to Karavan, who is a scholar, amendment of judgment is mulham according to the Holy Quran. I don't have the time to go into the details, but I can say that Karadavi says there are references to the amendment of judgment in the Holy Quran. But when it comes to Sunnahs, there are many examples for the amendment of judgment, like distributing the meat of the sacrificed animal. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, says that the meat of the sacrificed animal should be distributed to the people in need within the first 3 days. And next year, Sahaba asks Prophet Muhammad, are we going to do the same thing this year? Prophet Muhammad says that no, last year there was shortage of food, but this year you can store the food, etc. So there are different practices, and for instance, the limit of drinking wine was changed during the era of Prophet Muhammad, and Umar actually has forbidden the mu'allaf kulubu from zakat. In this respect, this is also another example of amendment of the judgment. When it comes to fiqh or faqih, we see that there are also many examples. It's a common example actually among the fiqh. For instance, Imam Shafi is given as an example in this regard. The fatwa that Imam Shafi produced when he was in Baghdad, he changed such fatwas when he was in Egypt, for instance. This is not only limited to Imam Shafi, Imam Abu Hanife, Imam Malik. They also changed their fatwa during their lifetime. So fatwa that they produce has been amended. The fiqh scholars has used this quite a lot, has amended their judgment quite a lot. Because of the change in the ezma, one cannot deny a change in the judgment. This rule is also actually very much well-established idea among the scholars. But change theory in this respect has 5 periods. The first examples appeared during the reign of Qayyim al-Karafi. Karafi said that changes in the traditions, there may be amendments in the judgments. Karafi says that there are 5 conditions for such amendment of the judgments, and according to Hanefi and Ibn Abidin, says that Mufti has to take into account the time factor. So this theory of amendment of the judgment has appeared in the later periods, but we see that the fiqh scholars has given enough importance to this theory of the amendment of the judgment. We can say this is the case because some scholars currently defend the idea that the ulama or the fiqh scholars have ignored this theory of the amendment of the judgment, and they have stick to the verses. Yes, such comments may be right in a sense, but all the fiqh scholars cannot be handled in the same manner, and that's because their sayings may change from time to time. The Islamic jurisprudence is close to change. Yes, there are some provisions of the Islamic jurisprudence which are close to change, but there are also some other provisions which are open to change. Sometimes the treatment provisions may have been subject to the amendment of judgment. But the absolute saying which says that the ibadats are tawbudi, yes, but there are some provisions of the ibadat which can be open to change. Most of the time it is emphasized that the ibadats are tawbudi. It may mean that all the aspects of the ibadats are close to change. So people understand this in this manner. However, apart from the fundamental issues, most of the aspects of the ibadahs are based on assumptions, are based on the case law, and are based on the traditions. So this is an indication that yes, there are fundamental issues which are close to change, but in ibadats there are some issues which are open to change. Fraysuni, who is a contemporary researcher, says that all the Sharia provisions are muallal. In this respect, it can be understood that the reasons behind such provisions should be in an understandable, should be understood well. So when we say change, it may be ibadet or muamelat, it doesn't matter. The provisions may be put into practice in different manners, and they can be understood as an amendment of the judgment. In today's world, there are many books talking about such amendments of the judgment. Subutu and dalaleti kat, or the provisions where there is an ijma about them. We think that they are fixed. They are not open to change. However, there are some controversial issues which can be open to change. So, in the amendment of the judgment in the context of Hajj, yes, of course, not every judgment about Hajj can change, but depending on time, depending on the conditions, some judgments may change over time, and we wanted to give you some examples in our paper. But I'm going to first of all focus my attention on three more examples, three concrete examples. Of course, I cannot talk to you about all the examples included in my paper. First of all, I am going to talk to you about Hazreti Ömer forbidding temettü Hajj, and or the Hajj travel of a female who is not accompanied by her husband or a family member, and the tawaf of a female who is in her period. First example, which is the Hazreti Ömer forbidding temettü Hajj. According to Hadith, it was seen that Prophet Muhammad has recommended temettü Hajj to his entourage. This is a controversial issue, whether or not he performed temettü Hajj himself, but it is said that Sahabe and Ashab actually performed temettü Hajj when they were accompanied by the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. What is temettü Hajj? It is actually Umrah before Hajj. So both Umrah and Hajj at the same time. What is the difference between ifrat? Because they cover themselves with different ihram. In this respect, it is very clear in the books that Ashab has performed temettü Hajj, and it is also mentioned very clearly in the books that during the reign of Hazreti Ömer, he has forbidden temettü Hajj, and Hazreti Osman, during his reign, he continued this practice. So what is the source of this controversial issue? Why did Hazreti Ömer choose to do such a thing? We see that there are many reasons, such ideas suggested for this, but people visiting Kaaba more, like visiting once for Hajj and visiting another time for Umrah, the more people come to Mecca, then they would be entitled to the maslahat of the Mecca El. But it is not, of course, the opinion of the Prophet Muhammad. These are only the opinions of the scholars. Ibn al-Qayyim is also in the same opinion, and according to Ibn Qayyim, this act of Ömer is actually a political one. According to Ibn Qayyim, actually Ömer is not forbidding the temettü Hajj for good. In other words, the main judgment here, which is allowing temettü Hajj, is not abolished. So what does Ömer do? As the head of the state, he is actually engaged in a political act, and according to Ibn Qayyim, this act of Ömer, and which is also sustained by Hazreti Osman, is not a general judgment which is going to be binding for all the ummahs for good. It should be considered as an act only for a temporary period of time. Fatih Bey, you only have 1 minute left. Okay, let me wrap up then. We think that this is very much in line with the amendment of the ahkam, of the judgment. Yes, such a act of Hazreti Ömer may mean that the judgment may be amended. I am going to skip the second example, and I am going to jump to the conclusion part. The issues, Shari issues, where there is about which there is an ijma, they are close to change, like the timing of the Hajj, or Haram Ihram, or Arafat Waqfa. So they are close to change. But the increase in the number of pilgrims, we are of course talking about circumstances apart from the COVID. So such circumstances could be considered as concrete reasons for change, and this amendment in the Hajj ibadat is an important example that amendment is possible. But with the reformist approach, or with an historian approach, stripping the Islamic jurisprudence from its basic roots, from its sources, is not what I mean here. So thank you very much. Thank you very much for giving us this very clear language.